Jacob Winters was a struggling writer living in a small town in Oregon, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and secrets were harder to keep than the weather. After a rough year filled with rejection letters and dwindling hope, Jacob stumbled upon a dusty antique shop tucked between a cafe and a pawn shop. The faded sign read, "Heirlooms and Curiosities." Inside, the air smelled of old paper and varnish. Amid the clutter, a leather-bound journal caught his eye. Its cover was worn, stained with smudges of what looked like dried ink, dark and unsettling, as if the book itself was bleeding. There was no price tag. "That one special," the old shopkeeper whispered, eyes glinting strangely. "It's called The Chronicle of Lost Words." Jacob flipped it open and found pages filled with meticulous handwriting. Stories, poems, confessions, written in ink so black almost shimmered. He bought it on impulse. That night, as rain hammered his window, Jacob read the journal by candlelight. The stories inside were chilling, almost alive, recounting tragedies of people long gone. But then he noticed something odd. The ink was smudging, shifting. New words appeared, darkening the tales, twisting the endings into nightmares. Worse, the longer he read, the more he felt watched. Shadows in the corners of his room stretched and flickered. Whispers floated just beyond comprehension. And on his desk, a small ink pot, not there before, sat filled with black ink that never seemed to dry. Jacob had no idea that with that journal, he'd opened a doorway to horrors inked in blood. From the moment Jacob brought the journal home, things began to unravel. Each morning, the stories he read the night before had changed. New paragraphs appeared, darker and more personal. They wrote themselves, describing his deepest fears, the faces of people he knew, and even events that hadn't happened yet. One evening, as Jacob sat under the dim light of his desk lamp, the ink in the journal began to move. The penmanship grew frantic and sharp, scrawling words that made his blood run cold. You cannot escape what is written. The ink knows your soul. The room grew colder. The candle flickered wildly, and shadows danced across the walls. His reflection in the window wasn't his own. The eyes staring back were hollow, filled with dread. Jacob tried to throw the journal away, but it always reappeared on his desk, pages open, ink still wet and glistening. Sleep became impossible. Every night, whispered voices seeped from the pages, speaking of old curses and broken promises inked in blood. Jacob's hands trembled as he realized the ink was alive. It didn't just tell stories. It fed on him, binding his fate to the twisted tales inside. One night, he awoke to find black footprints leading from the journal to his bedroom door, and a message smeared on the wall in the same inky blackness. Write or be written. Jacob's world spiraled into madness. The journal no longer just wrote stories. It began rewriting his reality. Faces in the pages started matching people in his town, who then vanished mysteriously. His friends grew distant, terrified to be near him, whispering about curses and haunted ink. One night, Jacob awoke to a chilling sensation. His hands were stained black, the ink spreading slowly up his wrists like creeping shadows. He tried to wash it off, but the ink resisted, dark veins pulsing beneath his skin. His dreams became nightmares where the journal's ink formed sinister shapes, twisting figures clawing out the pages, reaching for him. He could hear scratching on his walls, like desperate fingernails trying to escape. Desperate, Jacob sought help from a local historian, Mrs. Halloway, a woman rumored to know about cursed artifacts. She told him the journal was created centuries ago by a writer who bargained with dark forces, binding souls with his ink. The ink was a living curse, feeding on the writer's victims to never dry or fade. Destroy Jacob before it's too late, she warned. But be careful, the ink fights back. That night, as Jacob tried to burn the journal in his fireplace, the flames flickered and died. The ink hissed like a serpent, smoke rising in the shape of a twisted hand grabbing the book. The fire was swallowed by darkness. Jacob was trapped. The ink was not just a curse. It was a predator, and he was its prey. Jacob's body and mind were breaking under the ink's relentless grip. Each day, the cursed journal tightened its hold, warping his reality and twisting his soul. He knew he had to end it. But how do you destroy something that refuses to burn, to fade, or even to be forgotten? Mrs. Halloway handed him a fragile, yellowed letter, penned centuries ago by the original cursed author. It described a ritual, a last chance to sever the ink's power. But the price was steep. Jacob would have to write his own story, surrendering his deepest secrets and memories to the ink's hunger. Only then could the curse be undone. As midnight approached, Jacob prepared his pen and the journal on an ancient oak table. The air was thick with cold, and the shadows seemed alive, watching, waiting. With trembling hands, he began to write, not just words, but his soul poured onto pages. Memories of his childhood, his failures, fears, and hopes bled onto the paper like ink stained in blood. The room filled with whispers, anguished cries, laughter, screams. As the ink glowed brighter and darker, fighting to consume him, he wrote faster, defying the darkness that tried to steal his sanity. Finally, with a scream that echoed through the night, the ink blackened and cracked, the journal splitting open to reveal a blinding light. The shadows fled, the cursed ink dried and shattered like glass. Jacob collapsed, drained but free. The journal lay in ashes, and for the first time in months, silence embraced the room. Yet, as dawn crept in, Jacob noticed a single line freshly inked on the floorboards, faint and chilling. Every story ends until the next begins. Weeks passed, and Jacob slowly rebuilt his life. The nightmare seemed over. The journal was gone, reduced to ashes, yet the air still held a faint scent of ink, and shadows lingered just beyond his sight. He returned to writing, cautious but hopeful. One evening, while organizing his desk, Jacob found a small scrap of paper tucked inside an old book he hadn't opened in years. Written in jet black ink was a single sentence. Stories live on in the dark, waiting for the next hand to write. His heart froze. From the corner of the room, a slow, wet scratching sound began, like nails on wood. Jacob looked up to see the faint glow of black ink pooling in the shadows, swirling and alive. He realized then that the ink never truly sleeps. And somewhere in the silence between words, it waits,